Don't buy cheap watches. It's a very bold statement. And what we really mean is don't buy cheaply made watches. I'm going to go through it today and I'm going to make you understand why certain brands or certain types of watches should be avoided at all costs. In the past week, I've had a few encounters on YouTube, on private groups, on forums, where I see a lot of people buying a lot of watches where they tell me, well, it's a collection. This is some kind of accumulation more for me than anything else. And that's what I want to address because I've seen that happen a lot. And I'm really discouraged for people who actually come to me and want to try to sell me those watches or ask me, hey, where can I sell those watches in general? In general, a collection is going to be worthwhile when you're actually building something up. You're building your knowledge, first of all. Collecting is not only based on spending money. If you want to spend money, go buy some food, go travel, do something else. But when you're collecting, if you're telling me, look, I have 150 watches and I like them all, but you know nothing about watches, I'm really sad to say, but this is not a collection, okay? And not because I want to be pretentious or I don't want to be in any way rough to anyone, but the reality is that I see that happening every single month where people come to me and they're like, hey, I have this one watch, I pay a lot for it, and they end up showing me, like, again, we talked about it in the past, where they bought like a really cheaply made watch from a random brand that has nothing to do with watches, and it's a Chinese made $20 watch or $15 watch that they branded. I'm gonna name a few, like David Wellington, that's super cheap. I've had one of those in the past where the marker had to be actually reglued, and that was, I believe, a watch that was my girlfriend's sister's watch. And the crazy part was that yes, you can replace the battery. That's easy. But then one of the markers fell off, and to reglue that one single marker, you had to break the glass because the whole movement and the whole dial and hands would come from the front. So once it's sealed, it's not serviceable. Point number one is very important to me is the fact that a lot of people still don't understand the difference between a cheaply made watch and a cheap watch. You can buy a Casio, you can buy a Timex, you can buy a Citizen, you can buy a Seiko, okay, that is considered cheap. Let's say even a quartz Seiko or an automatic movement. But those watches have been there forever. Some of them are going to be disposable, and I'm going to get to that shortly as well. When a cheaply made watch is being built, it's being built to be sold to you. The after sales service, including that David Wellington of my sister-in-law, it's in a way very, very tragic to see that you're actually spending hundreds of dollars. And I understand a battery or a cheap movement, even a quartz movement, can last 5, 10 years or 20 years. I've seen people with quartz movements, that have really great experience with them. But in general, a lot of those watches, as soon as they have a problem, they're not going to be serviceable. So once the company sold you the watch, they don't keep any of those parts or serviceable parts like crowns, like dials, like hands, crystals. Sometimes crystals are really hard to get. You have to make them custom for certain watches. And if you go deeper into like a bracelet, a lot of people call me and they're like, hey Chris, I need a bracelet for my watch, or I need a link. And I'm like, I cannot get you the link. You bought a one-off watch. They made it for maybe 6 months, a year, maybe 2 years in their catalog, and that is far gone. Like, it's 10 years old. Now you're gonna have to search online, look on eBay, look on Etsy, look somewhere where you can maybe find a donor watch that's not working just for a bracelet. That doesn't make sense. It's not sustainable. The cost of shipping most probably is gonna be higher than the cost of the product itself, sometimes because it's a one-off product that's been made at one single time. That's why a cheaply made watch is often not even recyclable, or you cannot even reuse it down the road. The movement is cheap, the build construction is horrible in general, or it's something that's not fixable, including bracelets, movements, dials, any of that. A cheap watch like Citizen, like Seiko, like Casio, don't expect something magical from a $20-$30 watch from Casio that's still gonna last you maybe 10, 20 years if you take care of it. If you're acting like, someone who doesn't care, and you're dinging it around, obviously it's going to last you maybe a few years or even less. I've seen watches that are 2 years old that look like they did not one war but a few wars altogether. All that being said, it's very important that you make the distinction between a cheap watch and a cheaply made watch. This was very important to me as a video because a lot of people are really truly trying to start a collection. If you're not interested and you just want to buy a watch for the looks or for the brand, or you want to buy a Burberry watch, good for you. But I'm not going to judge what you're buying. What I'm judging here is the overconsumption of those cheap watches that I see people spending over and over and over again, and you're left with nothing at the end. What happens? You have three choices once you buy one of those cheaply made watches. One, you're going to have a big trouble repairing them. Two, it's going to be impossible to repair, or you're just going to leave it alone. Third, and that's in most of the cases, you're going to put them aside, the battery's going to die, you're going to say, hey, it's not even worth changing the battery change is going to be 10 to 20, $30, and by the end of that thought process, you're going to be like, well, it's out of fashion, it's not good, whatever, and you're going to leave it in a drawer and sell it for $5, $10 in 10 or 20 years from now once you do your garage sale, okay? From my point of view, a watch that is worthwhile, it's something that's going to be lasting. We cannot call it lasting forever, but we have generally, the idea of a product that actually is lasting a lifetime. And that quality, it has been lost for a long time. Most of the watches you see on the market that are from 50, 75 years ago, if you took great care of them, once you do a service, you oil them, you take them all apart, put them back together, oil and grease what needs to be done, replace a few parts, because most of the time good watches, even in the time, were sharing the same movements or similar parts. If you talk about a Valjoux 72 from Daytona from the time, or Valjoux 72 from a Yema from the time, a lot of the base is the same except the finishing. So then obviously if you want to go on the cheap route, you're going to use a generic Valjoux 72 part. If you want to go with the Rolex dedicated part, obviously it's going to cost you a lot more, in the hundreds of dollars maybe per part in certain cases, or even more. All that said, cheap watches in general don't have the tendency to last a lifetime, and that's my whole point about this. A lot of people talk to me about Heirloom, about how valuable their watches are and whatnot. It's not important. A Heirloom, most of the time people don't even look at the value. They're looking at, hey, it's something that was for example, I have my grandma's watch, which is a Doxa, and I think I talked about it in a few videos before, but that Doxa is a plain Jane, the most basic Doxa there is. It's not worth a lot, but that connection I had with my grandma, where she was almost like my second mom, I cannot replace it with anything else, knowing that that's her watch. A heirloom doesn't necessarily mean valuable. It means something that can be passed on to the next generation. And that's what it is when we talk about a watch that can last a lifetime, 50, 75, 100 years. And then the next generation is just like, hey, you know what? That's so cool. It was worn by my grandparents, and now I can still use it. That's for me something that's valuable. The value of watches, or of any object in general, is because it actually was made at a point that they were valuing quality. And today there's price and quality as well. That's my second point. Doesn't mean that you're buying something for a lot that it's worth a lot, or that it's going to hold value. And that's when we're talking about watches that are more into the branded watches. Those are also cheaply made watches, and they're terrible at, again, the support on the long term. If I decide tomorrow to buy a Gucci watch, I highly doubt that in 20, 25, 30 years from now, I'm going to be able to go to Gucci and tell them, hey, do you have a dial for this, or do you have a crystal for this? That's why when we're looking at the longevity of a company, we're looking at the after sale service, going back also to the fact that, hey, you know what? I can service the watch. It's 50 years old and I can bring it back to the company and no one's going to complain about me bringing that to them. They're going to be able to fix it. If you're wondering why I have all the watches in front of me, that's what I got today from one of my suppliers. And it's very important to understand that this is what I'm doing. It's a recycling process. Someone actually wore those watches for the past 5, 10, 50 years, and they were actually sometimes very worn, sometimes they're extremely worn, sometimes they're looking perfect, and we're just giving them a second, third life, or I don't know how many lives those watches had in the past. And in general, that's my job. Again, I'm not doing this because I'm also reselling. I don't care about that part. I just want to share you that I do have a lot of experience about those watches. I'm not in any way gonna judge anyone for having a cheap watch. I wear swatches, I wear entry-level pieces that are, maybe under $100. Doesn't matter. You have to enjoy what you're doing, but you gotta know the rules of the game. If, for example, you take a mini sub by just let's talk about this one because they're really fun to wear. What's cool about those watches, and we're talking about sustainability, about repetitive servicing on those watches. The cool part is that I think Tudor still has the bezels for those. Rolex still produces bracelets for vintage pieces. So if you do have a vintage Rolex, they're gonna give you a new version of that same bracelet. And what's cool into the vintage Tudors, you have ETA movements that are sometimes discontinued, but they made so many parts and so many movements that are shared with other brands that you're always able to find a replacement part for those. That's what we call sustainability of a market. If tomorrow I'm going to buy vintage watches and I'm not going to be able to repair them, there's no point for me to actually be able to buy them if I cannot repair them and guarantee them to you customers. And that's not only me, that's everyone in the market. And that's why it's not only applying to vintage, it's also applying to the new produced watches of today, where you're going to spend hundreds of dollars or thousands of dollars on them as the entry level of certain brands or of the market, because right now under $1,000 you don't get a lot. I want to address also something that I just bought yesterday. I have them, I think, upstairs in the store, but I just bought a few Underdog watches. Again, I did have a lot of requests from my Instagram post about those, and a lot of people tell me, well, how's the seagull movement? How's everything? I have a bit the same apprehension. Obviously, a seagull movement is going to be maybe a couple of $100 if you want one. They're normally unbranded, they have no signatures, they're pretty generic. But let's say tomorrow they decide, hey, we're going to cut ties, we're going to stop making those movements. What are we going to do? How is it sustainable to buy a brand new movement on eBay? I checked it out. It's $150 to $200 Canadian to buy a brand new movement, but my watchmaker is charging me about $550 US to service a chronograph movement, because there's roughly 200 parts, 200 plus parts in those movements. How am I going to be able to get parts for those movements? So you understand that there's that sustainability that's not going to be possible when the servicing of a watch or of a movement is not possible on the long run. From my point of view, when you can buy a brand new movement for maybe a quarter of the service cost, we have a problem. It means that it's almost a disposable movement. Going back to my point about buying cheaply made watches, a lot of people are looking into that instant gratification today. I see it made be in Rolex, made be in any type of watch. People are telling me, I was thinking to buy a watch and this and that. And usually, even during my travels, I met people that ended up buying a watch right now and then. I'm like, you know what? You could have chosen a bit better. Like, I'm not judging, but the reality is that you went a bit too fast about your purchase. And that purchase is always regretted down the road, because the watch might be too big, it might not suit the regular needs of the person, or a million other reasons that make sense to that one purchase. For me, it's very important for people to actually understand, with knowledge, you're going to be able to actually buy better. Not necessarily buy better in terms of, oh, I got a deal on the watch, but buy something that actually suits you on the long term and also that is sustainable. All of those watches that I'm dealing with here today are sustainable, they are repairable. In certain cases, like the Seamasters from the time, those are often very hard to repair because of, again, the movements not being able to work on the long run. They were specific from the 80s, really cool little watches, but when it comes to repairing, if we don't have the parts, we don't find the parts, then we have to invent new ways of fixing them. This is a, let's say, a regular Omega that we see quite a few times in a year from either suppliers or end customers that bring them to me. Sustainability on those is relatively low just because I know that most probably 30% of them are irreparable. I don't have the parts, I don't have access to the parts. Most probably Omega does, but it's very costly. So certain cost effective deals have to be calculated. If you do decide to collect certain watches, you have to factor in that maintenance cost. And is it possible to actually hold the watch for a long time? And if anything happens to the movement, am I going to be able to repair it? So now I just changed the screen on my computer here, and I want to talk about something. Again, we're talking about instant gratification, we're talking about purchasing a lot of watches, accumulating watches, and I'm coming back to that. Information is key in this industry. So the more you know, the better you're going to be at collecting, at pinpointing your needs and what you want on the long term. When I see the watch gang, look, the whole idea is very interesting of paying a monthly fee and getting a random watch on a monthly basis. I find the idea very cool and everything, but in general, it's just consumption for consumption. Okay, you don't even know anything about the brands in most cases, except obviously if you end up getting a Rolex or something similar. But honestly, it's very deceiving to see that people are just gonna buy watches just because, oh, they look good. Okay, that doesn't mean anything at all. I have friends that I've showed them like vintage watches that are worth fortunes, okay? They're worth the price of a little condo, and they're like, "Oh no, that's old style," you know. But in general, it's only because people have no idea, they have no clue, they have no intention of looking into it. But I'd say if you want to start collecting, don't buy cheap watches just to fulfill something, a void, or I don't know what you're trying to fulfill by, just consuming for consumption. For me, it's just empty of the purpose of collecting a watch. If you're collecting anything, you're going to read about it, you're going to be absorbed by it. If you come in my store, you're going to see a bunch of watch books everywhere. You're going to see me reading about watches on a daily basis. I'm absorbed by all the information that actually is pertinent to the collectability of certain watches and what people are able to do nowadays. And it's shockingly the work of a lifetime. Once you get into it, you're like, I don't know anything. And 25 years later, since I'm a kid, I've been into watches, collecting, buying, selling, whatever. Even me, I was a bit of a hoarder, and I'm like, well, they're not good. I'm just hoarding Speedmasters. I had like 14 of them, and not one of them was really interesting in terms of collectability. All of them had a flaw: the dial, the hands, the case, the bezel was not necessarily wrong, but was like too faded, chipped, whatever. Was I a collector? I was more of a hoarder of, yes, high-end watches, but not a collector. Now I start considering myself a collector after so many years because I started collecting what I like. I pinpointed the type of needs that I had, and I totally avoid all those brands that are meaningless. We're going back to the watch gang, and the concept is very interesting. But if you fall in the concept of buying, a random watch every month, after a couple of years, you're ending up accumulating. But with that kind of money, you could have bought one or two good watches that are heirloom quality, that are, sustainable, that are going to hold a certain value down the road. So you're going to buy something that you actually enjoy because you have read about it, you did your due diligence. It's not like something vomiting watches on you every month. And again, I respect the idea. When I saw the videos, they're really catchy. they're really interesting, and I wish they would actually promote something a bit better. They could go with something a bit more recognizable. It's not something that I would suggest on a long term. It's not sustainable to actually just accumulate all those watches. And you can imagine that they have a lot of subscriptions, they have a lot of people supporting that. And I do understand there's a demand for it, but please, please, please take the time to read. You're gonna be so much more fulfilled to actually meet a guy like me or meet any watch nerd and talk about watches. And we're gonna go from Longines to Patek to Lange to a Tudor to Universal Geneve, and people are just enjoying talking about watches in general, talking about different models, talking about whatever, okay, the good and the bad. But if you're just saying I'm part of the watch gang, I'm getting a watch a month and I don't know anything about the watches I'm getting, honestly, it's not impressive for you. You're not fulfilling yourself and you're just buying to buy. All that said, a collection tends to, want to appreciate in value. You don't want to say, I just bought 10 Bitcoins and I've collected 10 Bitcoins and now they're worth half of what I paid. That's pretty much what the luxury market is in watches. Most of the watches you're going to buy, they're going to lose at least 30 to 50% in their value if you're buying them brand new or if you don't buy them heavily discounted. We're not talking about Patek, we're not talking about Audemars Piguet, we're not talking about Rolex. I have a Chopard watch right now in my store where the customer paid roughly 37,000. I'm asking 30,000 on the website. Obviously, I'm making money there, but I can discount it by about 10, 12% maybe to an end customer with a wire. But you can imagine my customer just paid last year $37,000 Canadian. Today we're talking of a watch where I still make a bit of money at 27 grand Canadian roughly. That's where I can be more or less, and I can still generate a little profit. So you can imagine that he lost most probably around 33% of the value on the watch. Just to say, value of watches that is not necessarily holding even in the big valuable ones. If you buy 50 watches that are really on the lower end, what's going to happen is that those watches are most of the time going to be worth maybe even 20% of the original value. On those entry level pieces, you're the one who's actually just consuming for the sake of consuming. Cheaply made watches are not going to go up in value. Cheap watches, if you buy a Casio, you buy a Citizen, right now they're like super well graded on the market. They're doing amazing things. So if you buy one of those watches, you're going to do very well on the next 5-10 years, and that's going to be very good. But if you're looking for sustainability in the long run, you're young, you want to buy that one watch that's going to last you a lifetime, maybe it's not going to be the best choice. You have to also choose according to your budget. If you're looking for something in the low hundreds or sub $500, do read a lot of reviews. There's a lot of YouTubers out there that are doing amazing jobs at reviewing those watches, and you can do very well. Again, avoid companies that are just using a Chinese movement or something that's not for the long term. It's gonna hurt your collection by a lot. I want to end this here by saying it's a video where I have a lot of fun sharing my ideas. I don't want to be negative in any way. I I did a lot of don'ts in this video. It's very important to me to actually share that experience, and not in a bad way, not in a way where you say, hey, Chris said this or said that and he's like looking down on me. Never. I don't care what you're gonna wear, but at least you have the information of actually saying, hey, you know what, Chris told me to look it up, I'm gonna look it up, and do your due diligence. It's the most important part in any collection, in anything you're gonna buy. It's the basics, the basics, the core information. At least you're gonna have it. If you don't know, at least shoot me a text or quick email. I'm gonna try to respond. If I don't respond, it's maybe because I'm a bit busy, but I try to respond to everyone. And to finish off, talking about quality, talking about something that's valuable to me, is this company here, Henschel. It's the 20th anniversary for Watch Pro site, a really cool website with their in-house movement, with rose gold chaton for the jewels. They have a swan neck. They have a in-house enameled dial, amazing watch that I've been looking for to get for a while. And it's one of my customers that actually bought one, and he told me, "Hey Chris, do you want it? I did my time with it, and it's not that old. Very impressive craftsmanship, still very affordable." In that type of watch where everything is handcrafted in Hamburg. It's the last company in Hamburg that actually still makes watches, and it's everything about it is impressive, from the finishing on the case, the finishing on the dial, the blued hands, the details on the movement. The timekeeping is very good as well. And I believe with the service, I think they give you a second, basically they give you the first service for free. With their, they have an extra little charge on the watch, but the next service in the next, I think, 5 years and a half is free with the company, which is very, very impressive. And not a lot of people are just looking at that from, you know, from a sustainability point. Like a lot of brands, they're just like, including Rolex, they give you a 5 or 10 year warranty depending who you buy it from, and then that's very important. You can trust a company that gives you a 10 year warranty on a watch, and Henschel doing the same, telling you, hey, you know what? In 5 years from now, you have a problem, or next service is on us. It just tells me everything about the brand. It tells me that they care about the customer, that they care about the fact that they're going to be there for a very long time in the future. And that's what I'm looking for you guys as well. If you're calling yourself a collector, collect the right stuff that talks to you and that you can actually cherish with your grandkids down the road. I hope that helps you build a really good collection down the road. And if you do have any questions, have a look at the website and write us a message. Thank you and enjoy the week.